Hey, hi everybody. I'm gonna move this down. So my name is Sarah Cannon. I'm the exhibition manager here at FOMOPA. I would like to start by thanking the Tulsa Artists Fellowship that are accompanying us online and for collaborating with us for this exhibition and talk. I'd like to thank Caleb Lindsay, the curator, and also he sits on our board for making this exhibition happen. And I think we can all agree that he did a fabulous job. And then I'd like to introduce our special guest, Shane Brown. Shane is an Oklahoma-based Cherokee photographer and filmmaker, documenting the present-day cultural landscape of the American West. He's experimenting with representations of time and motion, and he's also working on a variety of film projects. So Brown's documentary photography project in the territories is featured in this exhibition, as well as part of selections from the FX series Reservation Dogs, which he serves as the still photographer for the series. So yeah, we're very excited to have you here, Shane, and we can't wait to learn more about the process behind the photograph. So Shane.
Hi, good evening. Thank you. And I'd like to say thanks to Caleb Lindsay, Florida Museum of Photographic Arts, the Tulsa Artists Fellowship. I'm honored to be here, and the exhibition looks great. So thank you for being here tonight. It's been a while since I've done this, so I'm a little rusty, but I'll just talk a little bit how I started with in the territories, or how that came to be, and then go through the slides and talk about the images that you're seeing, and where, when, or how or why they were made. And then after that, we'll have a Q&A. Okay. So let's get to the first image. Is that all right? Before I began the project that's now known as In the Territories, I was spending a lot of time driving all over the Great Plains and documenting the cultural landscape of the Great Plains. And from that work, which is probably my first real body of work that's known as Great Plains Schema, In the Territories was born. And before I began even Great Plains Schema, I would be out. I did a lot of driving around on back roads in Oklahoma, things like that. And in, I believe it was the fall of 2003, I took a workshop with the photographer, Jeff Browse. And that really opened my mind. Is anyone here familiar with Jeff Browse, his work? He's got a couple of books. They're really great. But he and his wife, Wendy Burton Browse, who is also a great photographer, they introduced me to the concept of the cultural landscape, which I really wasn't aware of that concept before then. But it was something that I latched on to. And so I began to explore, like I said, the Great Plains, and to actively put together something that I could call a body of work. And at that time, I was in college. I'd done a stint in the Air Force after high school, and then came back to Oklahoma and started to go to school. And a lot of my studies started to focus on Oklahoma history, American history, but specifically Oklahoma history. And then that kind of led into Native American history throughout the US, but especially in Oklahoma, and how Oklahoma came to be. And it was at that time that I started to learn that there were 39 federally recognized tribes, and that most of those tribes weren't originally from Oklahoma. And it was learning things like that that kind of blew my mind, that I didn't grow up being taught that. I grew up being taught Oklahoma history, but it wasn't complete. And so that's what I started to discover, was that it was very incomplete, and it was very one-sided, and it wasn't always true. In fact, a lot of times it just wasn't. the reality of what happened to shape the state of Oklahoma. So I began to go to these cultural events, anything, you know, that had to do with heritage or, you know, like Pioneer Days, Old West Days. I would go to powwows, anything I could find that was happening throughout Oklahoma, I would go to, and I would document that. And I would just document what I saw. I wasn't really concerned with composition, which had been something that previously, before I really understood, you know, the concept of putting together a body of work, I was very concerned with composition and just making artsy photos with form and shape and line. And then with this work, I started to lean more towards documentary. And so I just took the subjects as I found them in the light that I found them in, and the setting and surroundings that they were in. And I didn't dress anything up or ask anybody to do anything special, really, except maybe stand in front of my camera and present themselves as they would like to be photographed. And at this time, I was shooting film because this work was created, say, between 2004 and 2009. And so for me, digital wasn't really viable at that time. And I had learned to be a photographer, learning with film, developing my own film. And I went to this really great small school in Old Mulgee, Oklahoma, which happens to be where most of Reservation Dogs is filmed. And they had a photography technology program. And so I went there, and you know, we developed our own slide film, our own color film. And I really didn't appreciate at the time that that was not common. You know, I mean, black and white, you can find that on any college campus, or could back then. I don't know if you can today, but to be working with color film was exceptional. So I shot all of this on film, and I wish I still did this in the digital age, but a lot of these photos are one-offs. I would take one photo and call it good. I was shooting on a Hasselblad most of the time, you know, for any tech geeks out there. And so I had 12 or 24 frames on a roll, and, you know, maybe I had 10 or 20 rolls of film with me, and that was my limit. Whereas now, when I'm working on Reservation Dogs, I can shoot 500 photos in a day, which is a little excessive, but I can get into why I do that later. And so you'll see here, I would just select these places. I was in school Monday through Thursday, and then Friday through Sunday, I was creating these itineraries for myself and traveling the state and going and documenting these things. And, you know, here we have Indian City, USA, which is not actually a city, it's more of an attraction. And I haven't been there in years, so I don't know what state it's in now. But obviously the name Indian City drew me to it. And it's actually outside of Anadarko, which is, I believe that's an Indian capital. And then Cherokee Strip Days in Perry, Oklahoma. And like I said, I would, you know, usually I would call someone, some sort of liaison, and let them know that I was going to be there. And so then I could find out if there were any special events, and I could get any special access. And then I would just kind of walk the streets of these small towns or where these events were taking place, and take pictures. And at the time, I was pretty hyper aware of my composition in terms of what was included and how they were placed together, and what that said as a whole, you know. And well, here's a great example of that. But these girls walking here with the banner, you know, we belong to the land, which is a line from the Oklahoma State song, you know, Oklahoma, which I have no idea what the Florida State song is, but I bet most of you have heard the Oklahoma State song. And then to have that mural of Oklahoma in the background there. And, this is getting really particular, but at the time I was learning that, I just realized that's not labeled, but that also is at the Cherokee Strip Festival in Perry, Oklahoma. And so what I learned was that the Cherokee Strip wasn't actually in Oklahoma. Was a 2-mile wide strip of land that kind of ran across the bottom of Kansas and sat on top of the Cherokee Outlet, which is this that yellow area up there in the mural in the state of Oklahoma. That would be the Cherokee Outlet. And at one time that was Cherokee land. So when the Cherokee had their forced removal on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma, that part of Oklahoma also belonged to the Cherokee. And then after the Civil War, the U.S. Government, as was their way, found a way to take that away from the Cherokee and then open it up for settlement. And then a lot of my work relies on serendipity. I just love when serendipitous things happen, but I took this picture of these kids here. This is a protest of the Oklahoma State Centennial, or the Centennial for Statehood. And so there were just tons of Native people there on the front lawn of the Oklahoma State Capitol protesting the Centennial. And, like I said, I wasn't taking a lot of pictures because I had a finite amount of frames that I could expose. And so I took this picture of these kids holding this sign, and right when I did, that horse sneezed. And so it scared that little boy, and that's why he's ducking and looking around, and that's why the horse looks, if you look closely, it looks kind of funky. And then, like I said, I was going to powwows as well. Any event that I could make it to, I was going over this course of a few years. And I don't remember which of these I took first. Probably the powwow, which is at Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, Oklahoma, which is the capital of the Cherokee Nation. And then I actually grew up 5 miles from Sperry, Oklahoma, and I had no idea that they had an Old West Fest. But I took this picture here, and this is at a time I still work this way, but if you look at this amusement attraction behind them, the sign there says "We make you pay." Indian Casino, and then on the teepee above the entry there is painted casino, and then that head above the girl in the back is a caricature of a Native American. And so I waited for this family to walk through my frame, and just it's been so long since I've done this work, I don't really remember when it clicked, but I knew that these two images would be very strong if I had these families walking into each other. It's kind of like these two worlds. And then that brings me to another element of the work that I was creating at this time, was that anytime I could document multiple generations within a photograph, I would do that, because I wanted to suggest that this history we're learning, or this culture that we're learning, is being passed down, and I think that both of these images illustrate that. I love it that this little girl is in the stroller, being taken around the powwow ground. And then both of these images were taken at the Cherokee National Holiday in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. And I believe with the Cherokee, at least, the freedmen issue has been resolved since then. This probably would have been 2006, 7, or 8. And at that time, the Cherokee freedmen, who are descendants of slaves that were owned by the Cherokee, were still fighting for their right to citizenship within the Cherokee Nation. And that was another thing that I learned about Oklahoma that really, blew my mind. Has anybody seen The Jerk? You know, that when he gets the check and his head spins around? That's how I felt a lot when I was learning about Oklahoma's history, which, probably our most renowned state historian, Angie DeBow, said that Oklahoma was like a microcosm for the United States, and that anything that was happening in the States was happening in Oklahoma, in sort of an amplified way. But when I learned that Cherokee people were slave owning, it took me a while for that to compute. I just was so naive. and a big part of why I was doing this work was just to cure my own ignorance and to educate myself. And I was just kind of, leading myself and just going out and seeing what I could discover. And while I was in that process, I was meeting people and making friends and connections that were just opening, more and more opportunities to me, and just aiding my education in where it was and what it was I was actually from. And then, like I said, being hyper aware of my compositions and what I could include within the frame. I just loved it. This couple here sitting in the back of their pickup, great seats to watch the parade roll by, and they're sitting in front of the Dream Theater, Dream for Lease.
So they weren't in the parade?
They weren't in the parade. They're just sitting, they must have gotten there early to park their truck on the side of the road. It's been a while. And then I would go to, significant places, such as Geronimo's grave here, which is within Fort Sill, this Apache cemetery. But Fort Sill is a U.S. Army base, and it's where most of the Army's artillery training, I believe, takes place. And it's huge. And it also was essentially a prisoner of war camp, 125 years ago. The Apache weren't the only tribe to wind up there, and it still has even a recent checkered history. And then there are these places that weren't so significant that I would just be driving around and I would pass something, and I can't tell you how many U-turns I've pulled in my life to go back and photograph something. But I was driving through, I left a label off that too. I was driving through, this is in Apache, Oklahoma, which is not far from Fort Sill. And then I see the prayer teepee here, and, open to all, always open. And I really started to become aware of what irony truly was at this time. And so that was important to me as well. Anytime I could compose something so that the irony was exposed, or it was there to be read by the viewer if, they had the right eyes for it. Again, another shot of the Cherokee National Holiday and these 3 veterans here. I believe it was an uncle and 2 cousins. And so you have what is likely, at least 2 generations of Cherokee veterans here. And then the Kiowa Gorge Clan's July 4th celebration, which I've been to a few times. And I was there, and, my presence was known. Like I said, I would always call ahead and let people know that I was coming. So I wasn't just some guy showing up with a camera, potentially exploiting people, because that was something that I never want to do that, you know, in my work. But during a dance, this man here in this, you know, Union Army attire stood up and started to play a bugle during a dance, and I just it blew my mind. I'm like, what's going on here? And so I caught him, you know, on the fringes of the powwow, and I asked him, you know, what's going on, and he said his wife was Kiowa, and that there was a story with the Kiowa that they had been in a battle with the cavalry and had either killed the bugler or the bugle had been lost and they found it. And so they taught themselves how to make the bugle calls and then would exploit that the next time they were in battle to confuse the cavalry. And so that's what he was doing there. And so, you know, it wasn't just that I was being educated with books and lectures and all of that, but I was meeting people, you know, who were telling me these stories that I might not otherwise have encountered, you know, in books alone. Although books are a great start. And then here we are, Pawnee Bill's Wild West show. You know, and this was, again, most of this work was between 2006 and 8, but a lot of it was between 2004 and 9. And so at that time, cultural appropriation, I think, wasn't as in the fore as it is today, you know, and whereas today someone might tell this kid like, hey, that's wrong, or tell his parents like, you know, maybe not, or maybe the gift shop doesn't even have that stuff anymore. Although I bet we could go to Pawnee Bill's Wild West show and still buy these items. And then I just happened to be walking around, you know, through the parade while everybody was waiting to actually get moving. And there were a lot of reenactors there, as you can imagine, for a Wild West show. And one of the reenactors who's outside of the frame handed this man on his tractor his pistol, and then he's sighting it out. And then I just liked the juxtaposition here. And you can read that as you like. And here we have the graves of John Ridge and Major Ridge, and then just next to them is Stand Watie. Does that name ring a bell for anyone? He was a Confederate general. He was Cherokee. And so in the Civil War, you know, like a lot of the tribes, you know, some went with the Confederacy and then some went with the Union, and they had different reasons for that. And some tried to stay neutral, which was kind of an impossibility. But anyway, that's who Stand Watie was, which isn't even featured here. But John Ridge and Major Ridge were two of the people that were responsible for the U.S. government's removal of the Cherokee Nation, you know, from their homelands in the Southeast to Oklahoma. And according to tribal law, the punishment for speaking for the tribe was death, or, you know, for speaking for the tribe in this way. So they made it to Oklahoma, and they spent a few years in Oklahoma and in Arkansas after removal. And then one night, I don't know if you can read it here, but on is it June 22nd, 1839, they were both assassinated. And that's what these headstones say, is assassinated here, June 22nd, 1839. And then in Sugar Hill, Arkansas, was where the other was ambushed and murdered. One of them, I believe, was dragged out of his home and murdered while his wife and children watched. And then the other was ambushed on the trail. But they were suffering the known punishment for their actions. And actually, there's a lot of information available on that now, and there's even podcasts that deal with this from the descendants of the Ridges. And there's a play about it from, well, I won't get into that. And then this little girl leaning against the tree here is at a land run reenactment at Harn Homestead in Oklahoma City, which is just a mile or two from the Oklahoma State Capitol. And you know, land runs are things in Oklahoma. I don't know if they're still reenacting them, but I remember in second grade that we had a land run reenactment, and you know, everybody dresses up, and I remember having my wagon there, and we had covered it, you know, put hoops over it and so that it looked like a covered wagon. And so again, this is just another event where I wanted to go and photograph, especially children being taught this incomplete history. But then, you know, I'm standing there, obviously there are bushes between us, but I look over and this little girl is just completely disinterested and in her own world. And so I thought that made for a pretty good photograph. And then another thing about Oklahoma history that I didn't know until I started, you know, doing my own research and seeking out all of this information was that a lot of freedmen came to Oklahoma after the Civil War and started to develop Black towns. And so there are a dozen or more towns in Oklahoma that are known as Black towns, and this one happens to be Redbird. And I was there, you know, just driving through, and I'd been there years before when I was doing the Great Plains Schema work throughout the Great Plains. And I remembered this great mural that a barbecue place there had. And I think what I wanted to do was go and photograph it with my Hasselblad on medium format film rather than the 35 millimeter I'd shot it with previously. And I mean, Redbird is maybe 100 people, and the barbecue place is gone, and I don't know if there's any commerce there at all now. You know, it might just be residents that go to Muskogee or another town for what they need. But this family was at the park here, and so, you know, I just approached them and told them what I was up to and asked them if I could take their picture. And then that was kind of all I would do. It's just, can I take your picture? And then people group up in their family photo, and I would snap the photo and thank them. And, you know, maybe we would talk for a little while and maybe we wouldn't. But what I really, there are many things I love about this photograph at Redbird, but again, the horse kind of peeking around, you know, it's like just another member of the family. And then this one on the right was taken at the Muskogee Creek Nation Heritage Festival in Okmulgee. And, you know, it's possible I've been to that festival more than I've been to the Cherokee National Holiday in Tahlequah. And I encountered this family, and behind them is the original Muskogee Creek Nation Capitol building. You know, it's downtown Okmulgee in the town square. It's kind of like what all of Okmulgee revolves around. And Okmulgee is the capital of the Creek Nation or Muskogee Nation. And so again, I just asked this family if I could make their photograph, and they got together for that. And but one thing I really love about this shirt that this guy's wearing is that it says "does not assimilate well into other cultures." And again, you know, that just the irony of it. You know, I mean, it is making a statement, but it also happens to be an ironic statement. Another one from the Muskogee Creek Nation Heritage Festival, showing those multiple generations. And I just like the look of these guys and how happy, you know, they seem to be. But I'm also interested in, you know, like the present day culture, you know, the Biggie Smalls here on the shirt and just the way this gentleman is dressed. But I also like the way that his mother is dressed. And then his grandmother looks pretty disinterested. But and then, you know, they're all kind of glancing in this direction, and putting these photographs together just kind of looks to me like they're looking at these homesteaders you know, with and they're amused. And then what I liked about the homesteaders statue in front of this pioneer museum that was being built in Enid, Oklahoma, it was just that, you know, it's kind of funny that they're homesteaders and they're standing in front of this modern building that's under construction. When I can employ humor, I do like to do that. All right, so that's in the territories, and then shall I file through these reservation dogs photos? Am I good on time? Okay. So in the course of doing the in the territories work, like I said, I was making connections, and making friends, connections, learning things, building my own bodies of work, and building my own reputation as a guy who really knew Oklahoma, because I've been to all 77 counties and I knew of all these festivals. And, you know, I mean, that even led me into doing locations work, which I won't talk about too much. But another thing that it led me to was in 2005, I went to the I believe first and only Cherokee International Film Festival in Tahlequah. And that's where I met Sterling Harjo and Black Horse Lowe and a number of other people. And, you know, it wasn't like we became fast friends or anything. And it might've been a few years before Sterling and I encountered each other again. But, you know, there I was. And so I was kind of getting on the radar of people, different people. And I built up such a body of work that in 2010, 11 or 12, this publication started up in Tulsa, and it was called This Land. Is anyone familiar with This Land? Well, if you're not, it's okay. But it was kind of like doing with journalism what I was trying to do with my photography, was to show another history, perhaps a more honest history of Oklahoma than say a publication like Oklahoma Today, which is, you know, a state funded magazine, would show. I worked for Oklahoma Today for a number of years, and then I didn't. I moved over to This Land, which to me was doing work that was far more interesting to me because it was subversive, and I like that, you know. And so when This Land started up, my reputation was pretty well established as a guy who had been all over Oklahoma and just made hundreds or thousands of photographs of Oklahoma. And so they just kind of put me on the masthead as the I don't remember, contributing photo, whatever. I'd have to look at the masthead again to remember what my title was. But I provided them with an archive, and they would just pull from that archive whenever they had stories, and I had photos that were relatable. And at the same time, Sterling Harjo and a guy named Matt Leach were making short documentary videos for This Land, and This Land had This Land TV. So it wasn't just a publication, but they also had this television show. I'm not sure I actually ever caught it airing on TV, but certainly saw lots of that on YouTube. And that's when Sterling and I started to work together a little bit. And he and Matt were making a documentary called This May Be the Last Time. And has anyone heard of This May Be the Last Time? Well, I highly recommend that you find it. I'm certain that it's streaming, but if you just remember the title of the song, This May Be the Last Time. Well, this documentary had to do with Creek hymns and the origins of Creek hymns and where those come from and how they came to be. And the vehicle that kind of carries you through this story in the documentary is the death of and brief disappearance of Sterling's grandfather, whose car was found overturned in, I believe it was the Little River, down in more central Oklahoma. And then the community came together and they finally found his grandfather. But songs are a big part of Muskogee Creek culture, and they'll sing them at funerals or at Indian churches. And so that's what this documentary was about. And so while they were making the documentary, they invited me to be a part of it and to start doing some video, because a part of kind of my development as a image maker that I've left out is that I also connected with some documentary filmmakers, and I started following them around doing different things because they were also concerned with culture in Oklahoma. Like it was Brad Beasley and James Payne, and one of them had made, or Brad had made, a documentary called Okie Noodling. And then he and James made a documentary about Pitcher, Oklahoma, which is a super fun site where they say that all the bullets for World War I and World War II came from Pitcher, Oklahoma. Or at one time you could drive from underground from Pitcher, Oklahoma to Joplin, Oklahoma. I'm kind of getting off track here. But anyway, I had learned to shoot video from hanging out with Brad and James. And so Sterling and Matt invited me to work on this documentary. This may be the last time. And that's really when we started to bond and our friendship started to develop. And so that finished up. The documentary premiered at Sundance. It was a success. And then Sterling's next gig was to make a feature-length narrative called Miko. And he asked if I would be the director of photography for that. And of course I said yes. And we shot this film that he wrote. And in that film, gosh, who was in that? Sarah Podemsky, Zom McLarnon, Rod Rondo, Wooko Long, and these are all people who have now been in Reservation Dogs. Zon, is anyone familiar with Reservation Dogs?
Yes.
Okay, so Zon plays Big, and then Wooko has made a few cameos as, maybe the IHS security guard, or you actually, I don't want to spoil it for anyone, but if you're caught up on season 2, I believe it's episode 4, Mabel, he is singing at someone's deathbed. Woodco also features prominently in This May Be the Last Time, and he is just the most incredible singer. I mean, Woodco's singing alone is a good reason to watch This May Be the Last Time.
And Big is the police officer, right?
And yeah, Zon is Big, the police officer, and Rod, who played Miko in the movie of the same name, has been back to do some stunts. And then Sarah Podemsky plays Bear's mother, Rita. And there might be a photo of her in here. So anyway, after Miko, Sterling and our friendship was established, and we've worked on other things together. And then, I've just seen that guy working it for years and years, and just doing his thing and pressing on. And here came Reservation Dogs. He and his friend Taika Waititi created this show together. FX picked it up. And the next thing I know, I'm being asked to do stills for the pilot. And I believe that was September of 2020. And, which was a really difficult time to do anything with a large group of people. But this pilot got made. And then by spring of last year, they were filming, was it 7 more episodes? And I became the set photographer for Reservation Dogs. And so I'll just kind of go through these here. A lot of what I do for Reservation Dogs is, people are always like, oh, the photos are great. And I'm like, well, that's because there's this huge team of people writing the stories, these great actors, great director of photography, and they're all, every department is just great, the art department, costumes, makeup, and they've all done this great work. And then all I have to do is walk up, talk to the camera crew, make sure I'm not going to be in their way, take a look at where their frame is at. I've read the scripts and I've read the sides and I know what's going on. I've probably watched rehearsal. And then all I really need to do is make sure that my framing is good and my exposure is right. And so I really can't take much credit for being anything more than a technician when it comes to the production stills, which is what FX has hired me to do. But then I also do behind the scenes stuff. And that's where I would say that, my eye is kind of scanning, the scene and seeing what's up and looking for smiles or people goofing around or, scenes like this. This is DeFaro Lunatai right here in between takes, just laying down in the grass. This is was during the scene when he first meets Spirit. So I believe that is the pilot. And then, so next you'll see Spirit here. Also, this is from the pilot. This is Dallas Goldtooth, who is just a Renaissance man, as many people on the show are. He's an activist, a comedian, an actor, just and just a hilarious guy. Dallas is really funny, so it's great to see him play Spirit and how popular Spirit has become. If you're on Instagram and you follow Reservation Dogs or anything like that, maybe you've seen memes of him. But and then I look for shots like these, like Sterling with the 4 Reservation Dogs there. Devery Jacobs and Lane Factor and Paulina Alexis, and again DeFaro. And then this was a shot that I got on the pilot. And if you're familiar with Reservoir Dogs, you've seen that poster and those images, and that's kind of what we were going for here with this. And a lot of this is shot in the Indian homes in Old Mulgee. They're kind of on the corner of town, although there are different neighborhoods throughout Old Mulgee, but there are times where the production just takes over this neighborhood, and everyone seems pretty receptive. Most people seem receptive. Then here we are from the episode about IHS, and there's Zahn McClernon. And you can actually see Woodco in the background as a security guard. And then Richard Ray Whitman, also an artist, actor, and activist. Then this is actually a behind the scenes shot, but these guys were just hanging out. And, a lot of times when they see the camera, they'll act goofy or ham it up for me, which always makes me look good when somebody else looks good. I ought to try shooting this on film sometime and see how I would do these days. And here we have Wes Studi, who plays Uncle Bucky, or Bucky, sorry. Confusing that with Uncle Buck. Bucky on the show, and yeah, he's pretty funny. And it's funny to see guys like Zahn and Wes who, in a lot of the roles that they play, they're like stoic or tough guys, and in this show, they're both really funny. You know, it's really funny to watch Wes drop these jokes and, you know, just kind of be silly. It's great. And then we have Gary Farmer here with Lane Factor. You know, he plays Brownie. Brownie is actually based on Sterling's dad. I don't even know if it's loosely based. But anyway, Gary Farmer's great. You know, I mean, there's just all these people on the show where I'm just like, oh my God, Gary Farmer from Dead Man, and, you know, Wes Studi from yada yada. And so it's really wonderful to be around them. Oh, there we have Sarah here in the maroon or brown or copper or whatever it is. Then we're getting towards the end here. Spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen season 2. And a lot of it is me trying to get the 4 of these guys in the same frame, you know. So that's another part of my job is like, well, when these 4 primary characters are going to be together, then I really need to be there and be on my A game. And oh, I believe this one finishes the slideshow. So we can open it up to questions. Yes.
What is your cultural background and do you celebrate Thanksgiving?
You want to repeat the question for the people?
My cultural background and do I celebrate Thanksgiving?
That's all.
I mean, I like food. I like holiday breaks. I mean, I don't really buy into the whole Thanksgiving story, you know. I think it's BS, or what we've been taught, you know. It's like so much of what I've done.
Do you find that others celebrate Thanksgiving or not? Because in your photographs, of course, they were years ago, but how do people assimilate and talk about Thanksgiving together there? Since you see a lot of
I mean, I think people kind of poo-poo it, you know, or a lot of people that I know, you know. I mean, it's just like,
yeah, Publix commercials celebrating Thanksgiving like every 5 minutes, not in here.
yeah, but we celebrate Christmas also, you know. I mean, we celebrate a lot of dubious holidays in this country. No, Christmas is okay, but Thanksgiving isn't. Yeah, well,
Well, Shane, will you speak a little about your childhood? Because there's some stuff.
Sure.
You don't have to go into detail, but I think if she understood some of the stuff, like how you grew up, then it will.
Well, I grew up in a small town north of Tulsa called Skytook, which is named for an Osage man. And I actually grew up in the Cherokee Nation, and I walked to school, which was, my middle school was 2 blocks away. And every day I would cross the line into the Osage Nation, you know, twice a day to get back and forth, or just to go to the park and ride my bike. Which is something that I really wasn't aware of until I was an adult, you know, and then it kind of came to me and I was like, oh, that's what I discovered. You know, there are these 39 federally recognized tribes within the state of Oklahoma, and they all have territories. And like at the time, I didn't even, sovereignty just wasn't a word that I heard, you know, and maybe that goes for a lot of people. But I did not grow up in the Cherokee culture. Both my mother and my biological father are Cherokee, but there was no cultural practice. And then I was adopted by another man when I was about 7 years old. you know, and so I basically just grew up, you know, a white kid in a small town, but had tons of, you know, Native friends. But there was no cultural practice or Cherokee cultural practice for me. I mean, all of that is something, like I said, my mom didn't really know much either. You know, I mean, it was like generational. And when I started to discover, you know, I mean, something that I had known since I was a kid, we knew, or, you know, it wasn't like we knew we were Cherokee. We had cards. We were citizens of the Cherokee Nation. We were enrolled members. But you can be an enrolled member and not be practicing. And I find that actually like with a lot of Christians, you know, or Catholics or people who make these claims, you know. And I mean, just ask our jackass of a governor, Kevin Stitt. You know, you can be a citizen of the Cherokee Nation and not be practicing, I guess, Cherokee. So
Did you, as you sort of educate yourself on all the things that you learned and added to your background and history, were there elements of your sort of upbringing and heritage that you sort of were more prone to be a part of and wanted to you know, ascribe to your own life that happened through learning the history?
just to be educated myself, and now that I have kids, to educate them and to be an ally on what I see as the right side of history and correcting a history that has been wrong since long before this nation was, you know, even conceived of. So,
Today, right now.
well, yeah, let's not talk politics. I'm being recorded. I just remembered that as I called Kevin Stitt a jackass, but he is. He is. So, okay.
So was it when you went to these different rituals and things like that? Sometimes when we're behind the lens, there's a certain amount of voyeuristic feel, right? Because we're protected in a way. Did you actually actively participate? Did you get to find out more? Did you were you able to take some of that back with you?
Well, there were times, yes, where I would participate, but I wouldn't say in any in-depth way, you know. There were times where I go to things without the camera, you know, but the camera is a great vehicle through these various openings in life, you know, or has been for me. And as far as like being voyeuristic, like I said, I never surprised anyone or a group of people by taking their photograph, you know.
Was anyone upset by that if you had a camera as well? Because I know in
Well,
Ireland, I think these things. So.
I do have an anecdote about someone challenging me. I'm not sure if she was upset, but it was at that protest of the state centennial in Oklahoma City. And I was photographing a woman named Casey Camp and her brother, Carter Camp, who was, you know, part of the American Indian movement. Casey is a wonderful person that at the time I did not know who she was. I've gotten to work with her since then, filming with her and just being around her. She also is in Reservation Dogs. Carter has since passed, but then there was this other woman with them, and they had these signs, you know, and I believe the one that Carter was holding said statehood. I can't remember, but it mentioned genocide, you know, and then Casey was wearing an American flag as a skirt that was upside down and had writing on it. And so that's what drew me to them. And I asked them if I could make their photograph. And then there was this other woman with them. And, you know, I asked her if it was okay. And I guess because it was with Casey and Carter that she decided that it would be okay, but she told me that she was Kiowa and asked what I knew about Kiowa, and I was like, well, I know a little, I know where they came from, how they got to Oklahoma. By that time, I knew a little bit about at least the 39 tribes in Oklahoma, or that might be a stretch, but I'd say, a fair amount, a larger percentage than what I didn't know about. But I didn't know a ton, I just, so she asked where I was from, and I told her that I came from Osage County. And she told me this story about how the Kiowa had raided an Osage camp. And I believe it was while the younger men were away on a hunting party, and that they had beheaded the people who were there, or some of the people that were in this Osage camp, the Kiowa did, and then left their heads in pots to be discovered when this hunting party returned to their camp. And I mean, I was taken aback because I had not heard that story, and I felt really ignorant. I felt like I was being schooled, which is humbling and necessary sometimes. But that was 2007. That would have been November 2007. And at the time I was working for Oklahoma Today magazine, and I was doing a story on Fort Sill. And so I'd gone to the Fort Sill Museum to photograph the museum. And I was photographing just all around Fort Sill, which is how I got so much access to it at that time. And I was in the museum. I photographed the curator who had been there for like 3 decades or something. And I came across this exhibit called Terror at Dawn. And it told the story of Cutthroat Gap, where an Osage war party had gone to this Kiowa camp while the young Kiowa men were out on a hunting party, and that the Osage beheaded the Kiowa who were there and left their heads in pots. And so what I realized was this woman had told what had happened. She had just flipped it around so that the Kiowa were the aggressors or victors, or however you want to look at that, and the Osage were not. Whereas in reality, it was the other way around. And then I felt really frustrated because I thought, certainly this Kiowa woman must know her own history. And then that's, I think, was an epiphany for me when I was like, oh, everybody might be confused about lots of things, because it's so convoluted and so much taking place in, a relatively small space, the state of Oklahoma. Did I meander off there, or does that, okay.
But it's also that idea of oral history too.
Mm-hmm.
Like what things can get switched around.
Yeah.
Well, it's all a lot of those about revisionist history in general.
Yeah.
So,
Yes.
I began today watching Dean Mitchell, spectacular watercolor artist from the Panhandle of Florida, black artist. Incredible art. Look him up, Dean Mitchell. So, and then a lot of the questions about race began, and then questions about slavery, and then questions. And what's funny is, as the white privileged guy that I am, because I realize it, I don't know what to do. Like, and I don't know what to do. I mean, I love the education is fabulous, but it's going to be resisted by the people who resist everything.
Yeah.
And I spent lunch yesterday watching a far left person and a far right person talk to each other, and neither of them budged.
Yeah.
And so the education is fabulous. And what else? I mean, what do people do to help?
That's a loaded question.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know, vote in such a way where we don't spend $750 billion on different ways to kill people,
That would be.
and instead spend even a fraction of that on educating people. That alone might solve our issue with violence in this country.
That's really,
Yeah.
I'm asking you,
I don't know. I'm very cynical and quite jaded.
but you got a
So.
great governor, so things are gonna be fine.
I mean, I used to say thank God for Mississippi, but I can't say that anymore. You know, it's like even Mississippi is
You think you
doing better
know-
than Oklahoma.
and you think you know how it's gonna go, especially in the election process. You think you know how it's gonna be, you're so wrong. I'm so wrong.
I've been wrong since 2000,
Same here, same. Okay, I'll shut up.
except for maybe 2008. But
Do you find it, part of this question, do you find any hope in the community that you photograph? Like the different groups, the cultural groups, do you have, do they talk to each other?
oh yeah,
So that's hopeful.
yeah. I mean, there's just tons of hope. I feel like it's a renaissance. It's crazy because like my awareness, I just feel like so much has happened in the past 20 years. You know, it's in the past 10 years or in the past 5 years. It's just, you know, but I mean, it's still a struggle. Clearly.
Hey Shane, so Cheyenne here with Tulsa Artist Fellowship. We have
Hi.
a question from the
Okay.
virtual audience.
Yeah.
I know we only have a couple more minutes, but it's just one question. Kara asked, you mentioned Angie DeBoe's work.
Uh-huh.
Could you speak about ways that you see your work in accompaniment to her historical project?
Well, some of her books were inspiration to me, you know, like Prairie City, which is a book about a fictional city in Oklahoma, but it kind of tells the history of Oklahoma. I believe it was kind of using herself as a central figure, you know,